And I guess getting into the book, it's coming out soon in the coming days. By the time this comes out, it will definitely be out, I'm assuming. So so the possibility of life, science, imagination, and our quest for kinship in the cosmos. So as I mentioned to you earlier, I had a good little skim through, read through the intro and the last on Easter weekend, and was really enjoyed it. I think your writing is very pithy and kind of matter of fact. There's kind of no like beating around the bush, if you will. But I really liked this introductory quote you used in the Watchful Stars, the name of the introduction. Quote, some people are drawn to science by their drive to understand, but what I've always loved most is how science shows us what we don't know, how little we understand of the world, even as we're inextricably a part of it. I didn't want to answer questions, but discover mysteries instead. Mysteries with tantalizing possibilities, theories, and hypotheses, and whispers of the truth. Very well done. Love that at the end, that little series that you put in. So
Thank
what
you.
kind of, I guess, talk us through what kind of the thesis of the book, what were you trying to kind of do other than, like you said, fill a bookshelf a whole, and then kind of like, what did you learn along the journey? I guess that'll be the easiest first.
Yeah. Well, the thesis of the book is actually does have to do with that hole on the bookshelf a little because it's really about adding to the conversation and looking at how the conversation has been undertaken and what other ways we can look at these questions, which is a way of framing that I learned when I was teaching first year composition. That you listen to the conversation that's going on and you figure out how can I dip in my oar, what is my contribution, and it's in response to this ongoing conversation that's been going on for centuries and will continue after my book. And so the basic thesis is that we tend to think of this as a question of whether or not are there aliens or not? Is there life on other worlds or not? Is it likely? Is it rare? We think of it in odds, probabilities, and just like binaries. And my thesis is that while that is a necessary and important scientific question, it's not a meaningful question to like a regular person. What's really more worth digging into, and also the answer to the whether or not question would be meaningful, but the question itself, there's nothing to chew on. But a chewier question is what if? What if there are aliens out there? What are the implications? What would it mean? What might they be like? What could we learn from how we imagine that? And what does that reflect back on us? And what is the role of these imaginings in science and in our culture? Another sort of part of the book's argument is that science is an imaginative project. That because if you think about it, like a hypothesis is a work of imagination. It's a prediction, it's an extrapolation, and devising experiments is hugely imaginative and innovative and creative. And so that is, another one of the underlying foundations of the book is that science is imaginative. It's a work of imagination, that we approach answers through creative, imaginative work. And that we can learn a lot about the science through fictional imaginings. We can learn a lot about the fictional imaginings through the lens of science, and that all of these imaginings, like, yes, the scientific answers are valuable, but the work of the science and all of the fictional works are reflections of ourselves, and they're ways of understanding, they're ways of seeking meaning, seeking new lenses through which to understand humanity. And part of why we want to find other examples of life is to better understand life on Earth. And so my argument is that we can already do that now, looking through these imaginings as those reflections.
Basically, you summed up that point in a little bit. Quote, imagining extraterrestrial life is a way of figuring out what it means to be a conscious animal, what it means to be matter and alive. And then here's the kicker that I really loved. Our visions of space are a reflection of ourselves and our humanity, like the building blocks of a telescope, a mirror, and a lens. So again, well done, because
Thank
that's
you.
exactly what it kind of feels like.
Yeah.
But so if it's a mirror and a lens, I mean, you start off talking origins, planets, animals, people, technology, contact, and then you finish us off with a great conclusion. But I guess walk us in a little bit. Just I don't want to get too bogged down into terms, because I think a lot of people already know, like Drake equation, the
Yeah.
Goldilocks zone, Fermi paradox, abiogenesis.
The Fermi paradox, which I have to say, I am very proud. I wrote the book without mentioning.
Okay, so you didn't mention it at all. Oh wow, I
I don't
didn't
mention it at
search. So
all because so like the Drake equation comes up in the introduction, and I realized looking back that the structure of the book is very inspired by the way of thinking of the Drake equation, where it's like,
yes, yes.
what are the in the Drake equation, it's what are the variables that we would need to know in order to know how many transmitting civilizations might be out there at this moment. And so the Drake equation was never meant to be solved. It was an agenda setting exercise. He wrote it on the board and he said, if we wanted to know the number, we would need to know all these factors. So these factors are the topics we should be discussing. Similarly, my book chapters, like you just listed, are organized by these topics that are like, what are the various things we need to imagine in order to imagine alien life. And so we need to imagine how life begins. We need to imagine planets so that there's a place for aliens to be, et cetera, et cetera. So I find the Drake equation very, very meaningful. I find the Fermi paradox kind of irritating because it's like, there are a million answers. Like, calm
Yeah,
down,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah.
Think that and in earlier writings about the topic, like the writing I was doing in grad school, I definitely opened some essays or chapters with, in 1950 whatever, Enrico Fermi and some friends from Los Alamos were sitting around eating lunch, and they were talking about this New Yorker cartoon about flying saucers with the garbage can lids, and Fermi did a couple scribbles on a napkin, and then he looked up and he said, "Where is everybody?"
Yeah, yeah.
But it's just like, it's one of those things that if you've heard that story, if you haven't heard that story before, it's interesting. But I'm so sick of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's sort of like when you teach essay writing, one of the cliches is that the word essay comes from the French essai, which means to try. So an essay is an attempt. It's not meant to be decisive. Right. And so when you've never heard it before, it's actually really interesting. When you get your MFA and then work in like the essay world for 20 years, it's like, it's a cliche. And I used essays to try in my class that I teach, my creative nonfiction class that I'm teaching this semester. And I was like, here we go. I'm going to do it for real. But it's like a joke in a way, totally. Oh, it's to try. I feel the same about the Fermi paradox. It's like, okay, where is everybody? Well, let me tell you 8 million places they could be.
They could be. So what is your favorite? I mean, I don't want to say favorite, but I guess most intriguing variable, because for me, I think the three for me that is huge is single cell to multi-cell, like the endosymbiosis. Like what?
Yep, that is totally it.
Okay. Well, like, honorable mentions, panspermia.
Yeah.
Panspermia, where basically life was, say, on Mars, an asteroid hits Mars.
That's just passing the buck. It has to evolve. It has to start somewhere.
It does. And then time. We're too early, we're too late, whatever. Like time scales. But okay, so talk us through endosymbiosis.
So endosymbiosis, and this is where I end the book, because I sort of promise at the beginning of the book that I'm not going to get into odds and probabilities. And then at the end of the book, I'm like, okay, there is one.
Let's do it.
And so this is the idea that, so basically life arose on Earth just about as soon as it could. Like as soon as conditions were okay, bacteria and archaea popped up. But then for 2 billion years, that's all that there was. And not just that they were single-celled organisms, but that they were prokaryotes. They were simple cells without a nucleus or any internal structure. And the interesting thing about prokaryotes is that they are wildly innovative in terms of chemistry. They can share and acquire new advantageous genes by horizontal gene transfer, so they don't have to wait for like random mutation and sort of giving genes to their offspring. They sort of just like, because they don't have that inner structure, because their genes are not sequestered in a nucleus, it's almost like their genes are contagious. And even now, this is how antibiotic resistance spreads. Where like, if you've got one antibiotic resistant species, everyone around it can pick it up. But they don't ever evolve structurally. They just don't have inner structure so they don't have they in 2 billion years their shapes didn't really change. And then at some point there is this event of endosymbiosis in which, oh no, I can't remember. I think bacteria gobbled up an archaea, but it might have been the other way around.
Okay, yeah, sure. But one goes inside the other, right? Like that's the whole thing, and then it's a symbiotic relationship.
Exactly. That one of these microbes came to live inside another microbe. And that is the origin of our mitochondria. So in our cells, in the cells of all complex organisms, of all, complex single-celled organisms like, paramecium or whatever, the stuff that you saw under a microscope in high school, the big single cells. Well, there are big bacteria, but it seems like the thing that kicked off and permitted all of the other complexity was the acquisition of mitochondria, which are energy generators. And one theory that I am fond of says that with that new source of energy, cells had the ability to put energy into building all these complex structures. They now had more energy, and so the nucleus arose, and another act of endosymbiosis gave some cells chloroplasts, so they could, make energy from, sugar from sunlight. And you get nuclei, and you get ribosomes and lysosomes and the endoplasmic reticulum and all these other words that you learned in 10th grade biology and maybe haven't thought about since. And what blows my mind is that we know, so mitochondria have their own genomes. They have just the genes they need to make the proteins that they need. And that's passed down on the mother's line, at least in, organisms that have mothers. And so we can see from that these were once independent organisms, and we can see that it happened once. Every cell with mitochondria shares, it seems, a common origin. And the odds of that happening, the odds of one little blob gobbling up another little blob in this really advantageous, mutually beneficial, energy creating, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, it wigs me out. Because it took 2 billion years to happen. So that makes it seem like it was not easy, it was not cheap, the way that the origin of life may have been. So there are people who point out that it happened twice because it also happened with chloroplasts, and maybe it was happening all the time. So little blobs of cells, and I say blobs because they didn't have like internal structures, prokaryotes, to be more respectful to them. Prokaryotes were sucking up other prokaryotes all the time, and maybe this is the one that survived. Just like all life on Earth has a common ancestor, but maybe there were many origins of life, and this is just the one that outcompeted the others. Yep. So maybe this was just the but I don't know, 2 billion years for it to happen, and then it just happens once, and it seems so important to all complex life.
Yeah.
To have that new source of energy to do these expensive things like building internal structure, like developing multicellularity, developing cell specialization. It could not happen without mitochondria. So some thinking goes.